Hello, I'm Eric Snograss, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast for Australia. All right, I'm going to start you off with a bit of a global perspective today because as I've been traveling the country, I've been getting asked a lot of questions about some key growing areas, both in the northern and southern hemisphere. So let's get started with this. Over the next 15 days, the next 2 weeks, there's a few things I want to point out. Across the northern hemisphere, we're right in the middle of our the middle of our growing season for the summer. We've got very, very long waves being forecast in the atmosphere. Now, what does that mean? The longer those waves become, the more stagnant they become. And short waves move quickly. They bring through low pressure systems. They tend to give us rapid changes in our weather. Long waves tend to give us drought and flood, one or the other. They also keep heat or cold. It's just how they work. And there's a couple on here that as I've traveled the country, just ahead of a vacation, all right, I've been getting asked a lot of questions about. And I want to start you off with some international analysis. We're going to start first with this one here in Europe. Now, if you look globally at the precipitation pattern, I'm going to get to in a moment what's going on here with some better moisture transport happening into parts of Queensland and New South Wales. But coming back over to Europe, there's a large area throughout Europe that is forecast to be very dry over the next 10 days. It's not just dry, but it's quite hot. Over the next 10 days, from Spain and Portugal through France, getting over to Germany, Poland, all of these countries, very, very hot conditions. And it's been this way already for quite some time. In terms of precipitation, let me just show you the forecast. That's a 10-day forecast. There it is, of precipitation anomalies. And so this is hitting some key areas, especially a lot of wheat growing areas with very dry conditions. Now, while Ukraine is not expected to be forecast as hot as it had been, still quite dry throughout Ukraine. And we're starting to get concerned over some drought issues pressuring major sections of Europe. The Russian wheat belt, the northern part of it, quite stormy. The southern part of it, coming around towards Turkey, quite dry. So just a couple of things to kind of pick out here that are happening across Europe. Now, I want to take you next to the Indian Ocean. If I kind of move this up a little bit here, you can see that we have had a very strong circulation like this going right now, and it's been going like this for quite some time. Now, this isn't your true Indian monsoonal circulation, which tends to set up in July and August and September, where the flow comes straight like this at times, okay? This has been coming anomalously and quite strongly out of the west. And as it's done so, it's given us a precipitation pattern across this part of Asia that's been extremely wet into the interior states and through here. We grow a lot of cotton, for example, right here. Just something to kind of consider and think about. While we're on it, take a look at what's going on throughout the Yangtze River Valley, right in through there. Very, very dry conditions continue to be forecast. While the Manchurian Plain, North China Plain, it's kind of hit or miss on the precipitation. Much of Southeast Asia is very wet, and I just want to point out again, look how much of Russia is expected to be stormy because upstream of this area is that big ridge of high pressure. So these are the things we're thinking about, and I want to give you one last spot to keep an eye on. It's the United States. Now, it's pretty late in the evening here on Tuesday night, and we have watched this week an expansive area that had excessive heat. That's where our temperatures get up well into the 90s and over 100 degrees, so upper 30s, low 40s in Celsius. We're still in very hot conditions in through this area. In fact, I'm sitting in the airport at Chicago O'Hare's International Airport. I'm about ready to travel up to see family up here in northern Wisconsin. I'm recording before I leave because I have no internet up there. So I'm sitting in here and I am just sweating inside my truck where it's been so very, very hot. Now, our biggest kind of population centers are right here along the East Coast. There's 100 million people that live right into this area alone. But this is a major agricultural area that was very cold and extremely wet, some of the wettest we've seen across this part of the Corn Belt. This is also soybeans. We grow rice, cotton down the Mississippi River. So it's a major flip in the switch as this big area of high pressure, we call it the Bermuda High, has moved into the United States. Now, normally it's way over here by the island of Bermuda, but right now it's centered over Nashville. And if you've never been to the United States, you should come to Nashville. We'll call this a Nashville High. Just when you go to Nashville, don't get a Nashville High. There's some of that going on there. You just want to be careful. Anyway, big ridge of high pressure. We want to know where it's going to go. But I've been, like I said, talking to a lot of groups, and you want to know one of the top questions I've been getting asked is, what is going on here? Now, I've shown you this for the last several videos. It's the May drought monitor. We're going to get a new one of these coming up very soon as the month of June concludes. But the world is wanting to know the impact from Western Australia to South Australia, into Victoria, parts of New South Wales, what the impact of this drought, extending down into Tasmania as well, what this has done to crops. And so I've been showing them. I've been saying, look, we went into a very, very dry time period, while to the north we've had flooding, to the east around some of the big cities on the east coast we've had major flooding. But the precipitation ranges across Australia have been, well, much like they've been around the rest of the world. So we're going to start with the global picture today, and I'm going to finish with the global picture on a long-range outlook for the summer in the northern hemisphere and the winter in the southern. So here's what's happened, okay? The month of June, in a few key areas, has delivered some rainfall. All right, now if you look, this is the month-to-date anomalous rainfall map. I love showing it to you. It's been very dry along the coast. Some interior pockets have grabbed some additional moisture. This has not been drought breaking by any stretch of the imagination in some of these areas, but it's at least near normal to slightly above normal precipitation in a few of these areas with that hard black contour. We have questions as to where this is going to be going in the near term, and I'm going to bring it right back to the same topics. Since the middle of June, last time we talked, we finally brought in more low pressure into this area. It was a part of that transition in the jet stream pattern where the southern annular mode was going to help, well, deliver more systems. But we've had very high pressure that's been parked off way down here, kind of, if you just kind of follow with these two arrows away from New Zealand and off of the southeast coast of Australia, major area of high pressure down here. And that's been influencing the coastal regions by not delivering the moisture. If you want to get a whole bunch of moisture into the coastal areas here, put a big high pressure cell, put a big low pressure cell. Okay, so do one right here. You're getting that flow around it like this. Put your high pressure cell somewhere in here, getting a flow like that. Not way down there. That's too far away for this to occur. So just thinking this through, let's start to boil down what's been going on. Your jet stream right now is split. You have it coming in like this, and there's a northern branch that takes off like that, and there's a southern branch which takes off like this, and there's a massive void in the flow happening here. And that void in the flow has resulted in this very interesting pattern that's, well, given us high pressure underneath it, but also influenced the polar vortex. Now it's winter. We'd better talk about it. We're past the solstice. We're now fully into astronomical winter, and I want to show you something right now. Deep in the stratosphere, the polar vortex across the Antarctic is very, very strong. And I'm going to be watching it carefully for you over the coming weeks and months. And here's how we're going to do it. There's a graph, we keep track of this, where we look at the strength of the Antarctic polar vortex compared to historical normals. And here's what we need to think about. Kind of see the top line and the bottom line and the middle line, which would be average. Now, as we approach July and August, when that polar vortex reaches its greatest strength, any disruptions in it, like we saw last year, which is shown in this blue line, result in major temperature swings and a change overall in the pattern for Australia if it influences the jet stream enough. So that's an if. It's a big if. It's the same questions we have in the northern hemisphere with our Arctic polar vortex. But I'll just tell you this. We have seen some cooler weather over the last couple of weeks, especially down here in the higher elevation in New South Wales and Victoria. While much of Western Australia, South Australia, into the center, in the outback here, it's been quite hot. So I wanted to show you that over the last couple of weeks, this is the temperature pattern we've been getting. And we were concerned at one point about the cooler weather coming into this area and the frost extent. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But I did go out and grab some satellite data. This is from some of our high-resolution satellites that are in a low Earth orbit. That's why there's missing data, because they can't cover the whole planet at once. But this was some of the data that was collected on the June solstice, the winter solstice. And I can see you've got some snow caps on some of your mountains down here. We've been cold enough to get that snow. In fact, the forecast over the next 10 to 15 days is to put more snow at the tops of these high peaks. Maybe upwards of 30 to possibly 60 centimeters of snowfall at the very highest elevations. So we know we better keep an eye on what these temperatures are going to do. But first, I'm going to talk to you about the next 10 days. As we look at it, most of Australia is drier again. We do take note of something coming through here, possibly reviving some of the moisture that's been so difficult to come by in the month of June after having an extremely wet go of it in May right here. Remember that? We're now seeing better moisture in that area. Now, I understand this is more of the coastal city area versus the interior ag sections, but we just need to keep an eye on all of it. Let's have a look at how this precipitation gets there. Tell you what, I'm going to go instead of that to this. This is precipitation intensity. Now, as I'm recording this for you, we are keeping an eye on some showers that are down here across parts of Victoria and New South Wales. As we play through the rest of the day on Wednesday, those showers begin to exit and a front tries to clip parts of Western Australia. Wednesday into Thursday is mostly dry for most of Australia. But by the time we get into the weekend, here's Friday into Saturday, I'm keeping an eye pretty far up north here. And the reason for that is we're seeing this possibility of a low pressure center developing right here while a broader high moves just off the southern coast. And that low, as it comes through parts of Queensland, is expected to spin up along the coast, there it is, and possibly deliver some rainfall into some key agricultural areas, plus the larger cities that line the coastal area here. Where are we in time? This is out on July the 1st. Working our way to July 2nd, 3rd, and out there to the night of the 3rd and the beginning of the 4th. There is another front. Do you see it in Western Australia? Coming through, while that large low that was spinning just along the east coast is now moving its way toward New Zealand. There's another weak low to keep an eye on. It's kind of interesting. There's an area of high pressure here. There's another area of high pressure there. And there is a tight little low that's wound up right in through here that could also bring another front through about July the 3rd. We'll keep a close eye on that. But if we add all this up, let's just get a quick look at this. This is total accumulated precipitation from the European model. As we add it all up, let's get an idea on what some of these totals might be. So there goes that system right here. Where are we in time? This is Sunday into Monday. And then watch it spin up along the coast and watch it then move toward New Zealand. So overall, while we see a larger area that does extend back into Western Australia that's drier, same thing for South Australia, there are pockets in through here that could pick up 20 to 40 millimeters of rainfall, and along the coast, possibly even quite a bit more than that. We're looking at values up here on the color spectrum. Now, I wanted to mention the temperature pattern with this as well. So let's flip this over and let's look at temperature anomalies first. Here's the next 5 days, and that's day 5 through 10. There's quite a bit of cooler air in this region, while Western Australia sees warmer than average conditions. If we look exactly at the 2-meter temperature, so this is the way the model tries to predict the surface air temperature, just take note that when we get down here around 6 degrees C, I make a pretty hard change in my color bar so I can identify it a bit better. I do put a contour line, though, around the 0 degree isotherm. So each morning, what we see here is an expansive area, developing in the overnight into the early morning. There it is, of pretty chilly air. A lot of single digits here. So we need to be very aware of the frost threat in and around this region going forward. Here's June 26th. We can get out there to June 27th. We see it again. Go out there to June 28th. And you just start to see these larger areas, mainly surrounding the highlands down here. But there's plenty of cooler air that's in place. I'll just keep you going with this. This is getting into the weekend. That's Sunday. Look at that. Pretty expansive area, getting down to those single digits overnight. And then as we go forward into Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, we continue to monitor the way that pattern is shaping up with some cooler air in places. All right. Now, bigger picture thoughts. Slow this down a bit. Over the next month, what I'm going to be watching most carefully are these things. That is a big area of high pressure we're forecasting for the next week. But where does it go? And as I take you out there farther and farther into the month of July, we start to see the atmosphere pull off a little bit of a pattern flip for us. And that pattern flip could be quite interesting for the change in potential of precipitation. Do you see how it really backed off on any sort of dominant high pressure? In fact, it tried to build it back in through here. And a lot of this area is going over toward lower atmospheric pressure. Those kind of shifts, as we start to see them, give us a whole different outlook on what the precipitation pattern is going to be. Before I take you all the way in and just show you Australia, though, kind of give you an idea about what the newest European model is suggesting for the month of July, which is right there, for all of the world. Take note of a couple things. Very dry continued throughout Europe over toward the Black Sea. We do see still dry conditions being forecast in around the Yangtze, while quite wet. Manchurian Plain, North China Plain, India, very, very wet. Southeast Asia, Indonesia, very wet. You then come over here and we start to see the central part of the United States at the heart of our growing season. This is part of our winter wheat belt, our spring wheat belt, our cotton belts down here in Texas. We're looking all the way up to Canada, which is where we grow a lot of winter crops as well, but we have to have this moisture around. And we do see very dry conditions in the central U.S. while the southeast stays wet. But in Australia, the month of July looks something like this. And a lot of what you see here is coming early. I just showed it to you in the 10-day forecast. Overall, we do not yet see stronger signals for conditions to be wetter in July. We just want to know, is it going to get wetter later on this winter? So let's answer that question and get to this longer range forecast. These ocean temperatures are holding a clue to this. We've already diagnosed in previous videos the influence of the West Pacific warm pool, but I'm mostly interested in why we are still kind of capturing some cooler water in this area. And it's not just cooler water. There are still stronger trade winds going across the Pacific, and you know what's going across this part of the Indian Ocean. They're doing that, right? So given the setup of these ocean temperature patterns, I said, well, how are some of our variables we measure to understand those pressure and wind patterns shaping up? And our Southern Oscillation Index, it's actually back positive again. And that's actually more of an indication that we've got La Nina-like behavior in the atmosphere. I had a colleague comment on one of my videos for North America, and he asked a simple question and commented that, Eric, he says, is this behaving like even though it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, is this behaving like a sympathetic La Nina? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you're getting these stronger trade winds. We're getting this influence of the atmosphere blowing all of this, warm water into this region here. Some cool water still upwelling in that area. And then look at the Indian Ocean doing something like that. And he says, is this common? Like, what should we expect? I said, well, if you leave the best rising motion over this area and you have sinking complementing in the Indian Ocean and Atlantic Ocean, then yeah, we would say that that's Nina-like in its pattern. So what does that even mean? Well, I went back and looked it up. I compared the Southern Oscillation Index for July, August, and September to the precipitation pattern. We made a correlation map. And remember, when the Southern Oscillation Index is high, that's a La Nina-like signal. When it is low, below zero, we call that an El Nino-like signal. So where are we? We definitely have positive values right now, and that's what tends to make later on in winter this area and this area very wet. Notice where it's dry, where I showed you here, parts of Europe. And that's something to take note of as well. So there's a wetter correlation. So I started thinking about it. If we look at these indexes that tell us where the El Nino or La Nina is, where's the current one? It's still bumbling around down here close to INSO-neutral conditions. So we start saying, well, what if we look back and try to correlate those ocean temperatures with this, what we find is for Nina region 3.4 out in the middle of the Pacific, there's an inverse relationship with its temperature and precipitation, meaning when those ocean temperatures are cold, the correlation's negative, meaning it's wetter in this area, wetter in that area. So you just saw that. Look, drier throughout parts of Europe, drier throughout parts of the United States. So there's a very kind of intimate relationship in the atmosphere between these fluctuations in trade winds and these fluctuations in the ocean temperatures and the distribution of precipitation. I went another step forward. I said, well, we know that Antarctic oscillation you call the southern annular mode, okay? We know that it has had a tendency lately to go positive. And if it stays positive in July, August, and September, guess what? There's a positive correlation with precipitation in this same area. So we're putting all this together to try to understand this map. I've showed you this last time, but I want to show it to you again. This is the new outlook for July, August, and September from the European model. And before we zoom in on Australia, look where it's drier. Here and there. India's wetter. Indonesia is extremely wet. And if you come into Australia, we see this pattern. And I'm trying to make some sense out of this and try not to get overly excited about it. And what's that saying, right? When you're a hammer, everything's a nail. I'm not looking for nails. I'm looking for just some sort of cause and effect going on here. And I have to say that there is some validity to this forecast. But we have seen these models overpromise rainfall for months. And I'm concerned that that's going to be the continual case with this. So take this with a grain of salt. But I got to show you one last piece of evidence. I got to switch browsers to show you this. This is the newest data that was just released from the IRI multi-model probability forecast system. Now, what all that means is they take all these weather forecast models that look out months in advance, and they statistically correct for biases. It's not the best thing in the world, but it's another perspective. And take note of what it's got. It's got, for July, August, September, above average precipitation. Same corridors you saw that correlated to the Southern Oscillation Index or the remnants of a La Nina. What about August, September, October? Very wet in the north. Maybe some drier risks in Western Australia. But this is the kind of signal that the models are giving that say, hey, we might be able to start busting a drought in places. Now, I'm not going to get excited about that because there's one thing I know about drought, and I have studied drought extensively. And the first thing we ever teach our students when they're learning about the atmosphere and its processes is persistence often wins the day. And what's persistence right now? Well, if we go back and look at that drought monitor, it's been a rough go of it here as we worked our way into winter to eliminate this drought. And we have a couple of sayings. One of them is all signs fail in times of drought, meaning every time we see the chances for rain, they typically fail. And we know that drought begets drought. So I'm concerned about the model's ability to forecast this. And I'm going to be taking this with a pretty large grain of salt until I finally see a pattern change. But you know what I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be watching for, let's go back to those pressure patterns. I'm going to be watching for lower pressure to be residing in this area. And that's a story we've built now for the last couple of months. So that's where I'm going to leave you. I'm going to turn the air conditioning on in this truck and cool off a little bit before I head up north on a family vacation. Hope you all take care. Stay safe. We'll talk again in a couple weeks. Thanks.